Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the latest in our series of virtual seminars from the Audrain Newport Concours here in Newport, Rhode Island. Tonight's presentation is in celebration of our upcoming exhibition, Balance and Power, The World on Two Wheels, 1885 to 1995, and which will open on February 22nd in our gallery here on Bellevue Avenue. To get us into the mood for this exhibition, we've got three terrific panelists who are all very passionate about motorcycles. And I've got a pretty neat motorcycle behind me here, this 1966 BMW R69, which is going to be in our show, which will feature 62 bicycles and motorcycles ranging from 1885 to 1995, telling a story of these two-wheeled wonders and how they came to be and how they impacted on the lives of people. And of course, we here at the Audrain are all about the connection that people make with vehicles, whether they be four-wheel or two-wheel. Currently in the gallery right now, we are showing our show Small Wonders, mini, micro, pedal, and toy cars. So showing how engagement happens at all scales, in all varieties, and for touching all types of people. So tonight we're going to have a chat, as I said, with these three gentlemen, all of whom I've known for a fairly long time, one of whom I have not seen in many years, and I'm very glad that this offered the opportunity for us to become reconnected. But we'll start with Somer Hooker, who is a lifelong resident of Tennessee and absolutely motorcycle mad. He's a great restorer and collector, and somebody who truly lives his passion through all ages of motorcycles. And I know almost nothing about motorcycles, and what I will know in my entire life will not match what he has forgotten this afternoon. So Somer, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
I forgot a lot today.
Now, also joining us is Buzz Cantor. And Buzz is a fellow who, sort of like that wonderful old Razor ad, for those of you of a certain age, that said that, you know, the fellow loved his Razor so much he bought the company. Well, Buzz Cantor is such an incredible fanatic for motorcycles that he actually bought a magazine just to save it from going out of business and to bring it into the next level. He is the publisher of American Iron Magazine, and he has launched a number of motorcycle magazines. He's a real Indian fanatic and expert, but his true passions go everywhere throughout the motorcycle world. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. Like a true passionate enthusiast, he not only likes the way motorcycles look, but also, of course, the way they ride. And he doesn't just sort of ride around the neighborhood. He's done how many epic rides across the country, Buzz?
Well, I've done the Cannonball 3 times. I assume that's what you're talking
about. So he's somebody, obviously, who sort of gets what motorcycles are all about. And it'll be very, very interesting to get his perspective on what it is that we're talking about tonight. And last but certainly not least,
happy to be here, Donald.
Oh, thank you. Paul Hageman, who is an East Coaster, however, is joining us from his hideout in California this evening. Welcome, Paul. Paul grew up in a household where motorcycles and cars were collected. He's really a car guy, as am I, and it was interesting to hear about his passion for motorcycles. And I think that it'll be very interesting that I'm thinking of Paul as the bridge between me and these two great absolute motorcycle mad guys, Somer and Buzz, and then there's Paul as sort of the bridge between me and these guys. So I'm counting on Paul, who also gets called into a lot of panels like this these days, because one of the things that always comes up, whether it's motorcycles or cars, is what happens to the next generation. Is this something that's just for old people like myself to enjoy, or is this something that people who are younger, who actually have other things to do in their lives, might be fascinated by? And Paul, I think, can give us a great insight into that. Although I do joke with people, and I said, Paul is one of those young people that's actually born old. So Paul's sort of an old young guy or a young old guy or something like that. Amen. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Paul has spent a lot of his career working in the antiques and auction business. He's a specialist with Gooding & Company for many years, and now he's out on his own with his own company selling very specialized cars, and I guess more than a few motorcycles as well, I imagine. They just lose you there?
No, it's both.
Oh, okay. Oh, just stunned. All right. As I said, the exhibition that's going to open is divided into various ages of motorcycle, from the initial inspiration of the bicycles that came from the first high wheel or penny farthing motorcycles through to the rise of the superbike. And what we're going to do tonight is just to talk about the engagement of all of those areas. And the first question I have, and this is something that, oh, by the way, everyone who is watching this as well, you'll have the opportunity to ask the panelists questions. So using the chat feature, you can write in a question and we'll take a look at it. And if we have time, we will answer those questions for you. So we're very eager to make sure that you have your voice in this discussion as well. The first thing is there are three terms that are generally used for people who are involved with motorcycles. And is there a difference? And if so, what is the difference between a rider, a motorcyclist, and a biker? Buzz?
Wow, you start with me. First off, I wanted to follow up something you mentioned about Paul. Summer, do you remember when we were the young kids?
Yeah.
And everyone asked what the future of this hobby's going to be? How many years ago was that?
Yeah.
And now we're the old guys asking the next generation.
Yeah. I was just reflecting on that too, but you know, it's like
Where does the time go?
I'm handing off to the baby new year.
Exactly. So Buzz,
All right.
are they
So,
different,
wow,
or do
a
they
rider,
have meaning?
a biker, and a motorcyclist.
Yes.
My feeling is a rider is someone who's not as committed. It's an occasional thing. A motorcyclist is someone, it's a passion. And a biker has no motor, just he's pedaling like mad, right? Okay, now I'm gonna buck it over to somebody else.
That's what's one thought. Summer?
Well, let's see. Pretty much along what Buzz said, you know, motorcyclist is kind of what your dad and wool guy who he's into all aspects. A rider is somebody who knows how to ride and rides. Biker, that's usually kind of more associated with the, you know, the 1% image, so forth. Chopper, that's, you know, how you see it referred to a lot, although it's actually become a generic term intertwined with all the others. But I guess if you want to get down to finite definitions and get your Webster out, that would be, you know, if I was working for Merriam-Webster, where I would put it.
Well, it's interesting because now, Paul, I'm going to lay it all at your feet, because one of the things that I find so interesting, being somebody who admittedly am a car guy, and I really admire motorcycles for their engineering, for their history, for the design. I don't ride. And a lot of it is the fact that there was for a very, very, very long time, certainly Buzz and Summer and I can remember this, a certain perception of people who rode motorcycles and who they were. And I deliberately threw that in there because for a lot of people, biker has a pejorative term. Is that still the case, you think? For you, Paul, sorry.
I kind of think the lines have flowed together. I think, you know, I hear people use biker when they should be using motorcycles or something like that, you know, and, you know, going back to way back when, the image, you know, that was part of Honda's success is And they came up with the slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." And I was friends with Marty Dickerson, who used to do land speed record runs and so forth. He told me about when he was young working in a Honda dealership. And this woman came in, he was trying to sell him. She said, "Oh, we don't want a motorcycle, we want a Honda." And he said, "It switched through right there." He said, I see this whole idea now. And that's where, you know, you meet the nicest people. And, you know, these aren't motorcycles, these are Hondas.
They're nice people. So Paul, so growing up with motorcycles the way you did, there wasn't a particular stigma or an idea that people had about who rode a motorcycle.
No, not necessarily. I think the term biker definitely was perhaps a little condescending, but it depended on, you know, who was coming from and the context of it all. But I definitely grew up in an age in which, yeah, you had your guys that were more into super bikes or Harleys, but bike guys were bike guys and you had car guys. It was this really, there wasn't as much differentiation. You know, from what I experienced, it almost had more to do with the era of bike you were interested in, right? Or like in cars, is, oh, that person's really into British bikes, or that guy doesn't collect bikes that are in the disc brake era. And maybe that's just a generational thing, but to me, there were always these parallels, you know, guys that like Italian stuff, and so on and so forth.
And, you know, I know for me, growing up in New York City, again, even though I'm a car guy, my family didn't buy their first car till I was 12 years old because we didn't need one. I didn't see a lot of people riding motorcycles. I remember the first person that I knew personally that rode a motorcycle was a friend of my brother's when he came back from Vietnam. And they were very used to riding scooters and motorcycles in the Army. So they came home and started riding them around town. And so, Buzz, at what point was it for you, or was it something that you were always engaged with from the time that you could balance a bicycle, that you wanted a motorcycle or a scooter?
Interesting story. When I was in high school, my parents, who were vehemently anti-motorcycle, bought me and my three brothers a Honda 50 mini bike and let us ride around our property. They had woods behind our house. And they said, under no circumstances will you ever be allowed to own a motorcycle. And I thought that was sort of a mixed message, but I went with it to college. And I waited until my younger brother bought his first motorcycle. And then I announced to my parents that I had also bought one. A feeling not of rebellion, although I guess there was some against my parents, but the ability to get out and feel motion. And I've never lost that feeling. I like the velocity, not necessarily the speed. I like to go hard into a corner and feel it through the corner and pull it out. Different from a car. I do like cars. You know, they have a purpose when the weather's bad. So for me, it is a feeling. I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but it is as close to flying as I'm going to do. And even on an old bike, just throwing it into a corner and taking it through and pulling it out on the other side and accelerating, even on an old bike where it's not a big number. To me, it's just an amazing experience. I've been doing this for almost 50 years. And I enjoy it as much now as I ever have.
And so your first point of engagement, what was that like?
Well, my first point of engagement, I used to ride around on the back of a friend of mine's BSA and then another friend's Triumph, and they tried to teach me to ride, and I promptly pulled the wheel stand and went into a hedge. Which kind of cooled my ire for a few years, and then I rode some more in college, borrowed a friend of mine's bike. You know, like I said, it's just like, well, if I can ride a bicycle, I can do this and all. But I graduated, joined the Navy, and was found out I was going to be stationed in the Bay Area, and I thought, oh, California, I can just ride a motorcycle all the time. And I got this matchless, which was obsolete, and learned that it's pretty cold in San Francisco area. And also by riding a matchless, I learned you have to learn how to find parts, So the die was kind of cast there for, messing with old motorcycles and so forth. But the good thing was I was stationed in the Bay Area of California, and I had, the Santa Cruz Mountains up above me, Highway 1. I got to enjoy all that as part of my naval experience. And then, never mind going over to Southeast Asia. That was a little bit different. But anyway, it just kind of continued from there. And, I have always had a motorcycle ever since then.
Well, you bring up something that's quite interesting. And again, I want to say that I'm already off my prepared questions because I can see that this is going to be much more interesting than anything that I had actually planned to ask. But something that I was planning to ask in a certain form was about engagement, because I know for me as a driver, I like things that engage me in the driving experience. And so what both you, Buzz, and Somer just said is something about that friends of mine who are motorcyclists all talk about that feeling of engagement in both riding and in maintaining a motorcycle. And do you think that that is something that sort of separates the people who are truly passionate about bikes from people who are truly passionate about cars? Can you get the same level of engagement with a car, you think, that you can with a motorcycle? First.
To continue with what Buzz was talking about, taking something into a corner, you become more of a fusion with machine. I think it was, I'm not sure, John Opdyke wrote a book, Centaur, about fusion of man and machine. When you really become adept at riding a motorcycle, you really do begin to fuse, because you're getting all this subtle feedback and learning to dial the throttle in and out, shift your body weight around, and you can go out and ride a bunch of hard corners, and all of a sudden you come in and you realize the inside of your legs are aching because you've been pushing down the pegs and trying to manipulate it a little bit more. And all this goes on without really thinking. You're just, you're dialing it in and out and all, and just go into situations where, I've taken track days and you go in hard and all of a sudden you go, oh, that was my knee, you scrape and you pop back up and all. But it's a good thing you can do that, because my experience is you got to be paying attention to everybody around you, because, the first lesson I learned is everybody out there on a car is going to try and kill you. And sometimes other people on motorcycles will try and kill you too. So, forth, but there is, like, Buzz was saying, is good satisfaction and engagement. Now, I have some old Alfa Romeos too, and I like to throw them around in corners and, go through the gears. It's kind of the same thing, but it's not quite, you're not using all your body and so forth. It's more like steering, throttle, brake, shift type thing. I don't hang out the window and try and make it go over.
Well, I'm going
to, but
only 16 or so minutes into our program, I have to get incredibly esoteric because I think the universe has just delivered this. One of our viewers asked a question, and it touches on something that you actually teed up beautifully, Somer, and it also feeds into one of my great passions, other passions, which is art. And Jeff Stein asked if we would talk about the Italian futurists from 1909 onward and how speed shaped the early 20th century. And I absolutely am mad for Italian futurist art. I've got some of it myself, and they really loved the idea of machine and the machine age and bring us forward, and especially the unity of man and machine. And there's so much great Italian futurist art that involves motorcyclists. So anybody want to talk about that? Paul?
Well, I think, I'm not as up to speed on the art, but I always obviously put everything in my life is in the context of cars. But when I think about the relationship with bikes, I think back to one of my favorite eras, which is the alpha of the 30s and Scuderia Ferrari and sort of this heyday of racing and the old Ferrari yearbooks. And you look at the pictures of the garages, and sitting right next to all these fabulous 8C Alphas are these bikes. I think that so often we extrapolate things and we pull them apart, and bikes are over here and cars are over here. And to me, what's always been so interesting about it is that they are so similar, and that, you know, the different eras, what's comparable in terms of development between the two. You know, when you look at early sports racing, you know, America, you know, the S in the 50s and 60s, it was the same thing happening with bikes. You know, you had really trick, you know, works Italian stuff coming over, but you also had guys on British things that, you know, it was an effort both in a lot of seriousness, but also in a lot of fun. And I think it's that combination of those two things that maybe here I've even strayed off topic for you again already, but I think the reason we're all passionate about all of these types of things is because they are in fact intertwined.
The topic is motorcycles, so we can't ever stray too far off. Let's start talking about, you know, trucks or something like that. But I'm going to go to you, Buzz, because thinking about, again, some of this Italian futurist art from the pre-World War I period and the period immediately after World War I, and your experience, something that you said, Paul, about looking in the garages and seeing these great motorcycles sitting next to these racing cars, and the fact that so many of the early racing drivers got started as motorcycle racers. And Buzz, you know, talk about that unity, you know, being one with the machine. You've ridden for great distances and a great deal these early racing motorcycles. What are they like?
Let me touch on the Italian thing. One big difference, or let me start, one big similarity between Italian cars and Italian motorcycles is the aesthetic. Yes, they need to be functional. Yes, they need to be sexy and speedy. But the castings, the design elements, the lines. I have a 1950s Moto Guzzi Falcone Sport. It's a 500cc single. And the parts look like they were cast by a sculptor. And on a car, a lot of that stuff's hidden under tin. So the tin tends to be the design. On the motorcycle, it's the engine. Now, obviously there is tin, but some of the castings, I mean, Summer, you've seen this stuff too. And I know, Paul, you got an old Ducati single. So some of the castings are gorgeous. So what was the other question you asked about riding old bikes?
The experience of riding a truly vintage, a pre-World War I racing bike.
Absolutely. The most extreme I've ever done was racing a board tracker, a 1915 Harley Davidson board tracker down at New Smyrna Beach Speedway with Billy Lane. A board tracker, for people who don't know, is basically a bicycle with a 100-mile-an-hour motor strapped in it. There's no suspension. There are no brakes. There's no transmission and no clutch. So to start it, you push it up a hill, you bump it down the hill, direct drive, and fire it off. And it's magneto driven. And these things, we had them the first time I went out on this to race. We were hitting probably 70 miles an hour on banked things. 3 years later, they're doing over 100 miles an hour, and I've had enough. I don't bounce as well as I used to. But these machines are primitive, they're crude, and they're fast. Another 1915 Harley I rode was from coast to coast, from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina to Santa Monica, California on the first Cannondale. And on this, we did have clutches and brakes and transmissions. On this, you have to service your own bike. So you can have a mechanic, but they have to be at the hotel that you pull in the next night. They're not allowed on the course. So you're very, very aware. It's not a speed event, it's an endurance event. So if you're riding along and the bike's going binka bonka, boop, you want to know what that boom is. And you're very aware and very dialed in. You have to have confidence in your machine and learn confidence in your mechanics, your own mechanical skills. But these things are very romantic. I'm sure there's a crossover to the car world, but the older they are, the simpler they are, the more primitive they are, and the more romantic they are to keep these things on the road and going down the road.
I want to go in two different directions here. First, to continue with the board track racer for a moment, because something which I learned only recently, having seen lots of images of board track racing and photographs, I never realized that the boards were laid longitudinally along the track and not nailed down.
Yeah.
And that I thought, gee, that must have made it
Splinter Road.
extremely exciting.
Yeah, it was called Splinter Road because when you go down, you rip up chunks and you can die from the splinters.
Yeah. There's
Now,
actually,
we did it on asphalt.
yeah, there are actually tales of, splinters flying off of the back of wheels and impaling the guy behind them, and guys would come in with a 7-inch splinter through their leg. That was just an occupational hazard. And then sometimes the board would collapse and, the front wheel would go down. And they became known as murder drones, but that was the only thing they had that was solid pavement back then, so to speak. I mean, they actually raced some cars on them too. And, originally bicycles started racing on smaller tracks like that. And then they got bigger, and they would actually bring in a motorcycle to break the wind of the bicycle, and he would ride behind them to get up more speed and so forth. So, but yeah, that was, I guess the last board track was phased out in probably the early 20s. I mean, you can imagine how much they cost to maintain also, all that wood. And then, you have a couple of kids smoking a cigarette down underneath and the thing goes up in flames. But, you really had to want to race because, like Buzz said, you're pretty much, you're almost strapped on that thing with no suspension other than your tires, which are probably pumped up to about 90 pounds of pressure and exceeding 100 miles per hour. And the only way you modulate your speed is with a magneto cutout. You kill the engine to slow it down. It gets a little bit for the corner, and then you gets let off, and momentum keeps you going again.
Yeah, it must have certainly kept your attention for sure. And it's a very interesting thing that I read a very interesting book. Actually, I'm reading a very interesting book that's going to be published soon about these objects, whether they be automobiles or motorcycles or even bicycles, frankly, as sort of archaeological objects. And it's interesting thing to see how they progress and why they progress, sort of the effect of society on them. And the fact that in the United States, they developed in a slightly different way than they did in Europe, where the motorcycle, I think, was much more accepted as an everyday form of transportation by a wider part of the populace than here in the US, perhaps because of the distances. I'm not quite sure why. How do you think that also affected the way the motorcycle developed here and its interest in terms of society?
Well,
is my opinion completely wrong? It could be.
If you look at the European machines, they tend to be lighter and smaller and thinner, whereas the American machines, like the cars, tend to be more muscle and strength. We've got a big country to cover and big roads to deal with. So a lot of the European and British bikes are more svelte. Gas is more expensive, roads are smaller, and often there's either stone walls or hedges along the side of the road. In America, we got big Harleys and big Indians, and if you go off the road, you end up chasing a cow.
Yeah.
More or less agree, gentlemen?
Well, I find that European, mechanical products, whether it's cars or bike, are driven more by ingenuity through motorsport. So, the racing always played a role, whether we're talking about cars or bikes. And what was, successful on the track made its way to production motorcycles, I think much more commonly with British bikes and European bikes than it did with American bikes. And I think the same could actually be said for Japanese bikes as well.
Yeah.
And to get back to the, this is the second, going back to the fork and taking the other road. When you were talking before, Buzz, about the castings on the Italian bikes, and I said at the beginning of this program that I'm not a writer, but I've always admired the design of motorcycles. And in fact, it's very interesting sitting here. Now, this is a car, motorcycle, and transportation museum. But the fact that the first time sort of motor vehicles were welcomed and accepted in fine art museums was the great exhibition that the Guggenheim did of motorcycles, and which absolutely captivated me. I mean, I visited at least 4 or 5 times and had to buy 2 catalogs because one I just wore out thumbing through it. And I think that the idea that motorcycles can be appreciated as aesthetic objects has also certainly driven a lot of interest in it. But again, do you think that that creates a divide in general between the people that appreciate something like this BMW as a sculptural object and somebody who sort of appreciates that as a more kinetic thing, the smell of it, the vibration, all of that? What do you think? Zomer?
Yeah, I mean, I've had people, I tend to ride out in the country, eat breakfast on Sundays, and I've had people, I always typically ride something old out there, and have people come up and say, I don't know anything about motorcycles, but that's really neat, so the aesthetics are attracting them, I see that a lot. I think people, they just, they appreciate them for design, and the way the aesthetics hit them. The more than gets a utilitarian motorcycle, vehicle or instrument, or machine, I guess you would say. I mean, some, they're just plain ugly and so forth, but some are just beautiful. You can tell a whole lot of styling is going into them, and just making them functionally work.
And Buzz, we had a conversation earlier about collecting, and I know, Paul, we also chatted about this. And one of the interesting things, of course, is that I noticed probably about perhaps 20 years ago or so, a number of car collectors that I knew began to look at motorcycles in a different way. One of the reasons was that when people were looking at the vast appreciation in the values of collector cars, they began to say, for what it would cost to buy an ordinary car, you can buy a really sort of important motorcycle, and it also takes up less space and all of this. What effect has that had on the people who are the types that like to have the more experiential relationship with the motorcycle?
Well, I think people buy motorcycles for lots and lots, and for them, they're valid, and it's not for us to judge. Some people buy them because they love the looks of them. They want them in their man cave or in their living room or on a wall. That it's, as long as they don't do damage to them, I guess that's fine. But what happened was, as the collector market really started climbing for cars, I think a lot of the auction houses realized the motorcycles are still fairly untapped and still relatively great values. So I think they started bringing them out to some of the car auctions, and they were well received. I think it opened a lot of people's eyes who don't ride motorcycles. Some of them because they think it's a financial investment, some because it's an emotional investment, some reason to. Behind you
think you just froze up a little there, Buzz.
This is your area. But I mean, it's a classic look. Sorry?
You froze your video.
I
froze
recently bought.
Just what you just said. Sorry.
And the traditional black with white pinstripe with the rondelle on the tank and the knee pads, they're classic. They're timeless. People have bought they're called Airhead BMWs, and they bought the Airheads because they work. They're simple to maintain. They're simple to fix. They handle well. You're going to go out of town and come back without any major drama. And it's been timeless. So if this is what floats their boat, that's great. It keeps the motorcycles front and center, and lots of different reasons, and they're all valid.
And Paul, being directly involved in the sales business, what have you seen, and what have you observed, and what have you heard?
Yeah, I definitely agree that more car collectors tend to be buying bikes as well. And I think a lot of that is the garage art aspect of it, because I think few of them ride. But I think there's also that aspect that, when there was that car you wanted in high school, or the poster you had on your wall as a kid, could have just as easily been a sport bike as it could have a sports car. But additionally, I do think it has to do with value. I know that, Dad and I, who while we deal in both cars and bikes, also collect both of them, the overarching thing for us is that they're just great value. They maybe don't offer to a car guy the same opportunities for use, but when you sort of think, like the bike behind you, for example, the car that I would consider most comparable to that, you add zero to the price tag, and I think that $100,000 in cars doesn't get you a whole lot anymore today in terms of real collectible stuff from a particular era. That's a lot of money in bikes. So I think it's a way for people to gravitate towards something where they see value, but it's also, I think it is because those worlds, just as in terms of collecting, a motorcycle collector's gone broader. A car collector's gone broader. I think because of that, and that sort of cross-pollination, you're seeing more of it as well.
I'm going to ask one more question about sort of value in collecting, and then go off in a totally different direction. But for many motorcycles, as you said, they're often displayed in a static manner. Some, as Summer, you and I were talking about the fact that some bikes have been restored, and obviously, many bikes are restored dry and remain dry. Does that have a long-term impact on their ultimate usability and then, frankly, importance? Can they be reanimated, or is that you have to re-restore it all over again?
Well, yeah, machines don't like to sit. Bearings will take a set. It's good to, at least turn things over. Or, the best thing is just take something out and run it a little while. And then just, drain it down again and put it away. But, stuff that people, the thing that really used to irritate me, people say, it's a fresh registration, has 0 miles. And I went, oh, it's like this customer used to say, he said, I don't want to be the final link in quality assurance. Yeah, I'll tell you a little interesting side story to back up this to hear you talk about car collections having motorcycles to kind of punctuate it. Originally, George Barber started his museum. It was a private collection for a long time. It was a car collection. And the guy that worked for him said, let's put a couple motorcycles in here. Well, you see where that went. And rid of a lot of the cars. He still has formal collection. I can remember being down when I dealt with him in the early days when it was still private. He had a Ferrari Dino in there. And he said, "Oh, I want to get rid of this." He gave me a great price. Of course, I didn't have any money. I mean, when I'm looking back now, oh, I could have had that Ferrari, you know. But anyway, that's kind of how he got started on that. And now, you know, it's the world's largest collection of motorcycles.
Buzz, you're about to say?
Yeah. And
I was just saying, thank goodness that Barbara did.
yeah. And all of his bikes run. You know, they restore them and they run them. And they'll tell you there are a few that don't, but you know, that was one of his pensions. It has to run. And one time he learned that maybe some people had done some work and didn't run. He said, you know, I'm thinking about coming over there and riding that tomorrow. And boy, there's some people burn some midnight oil after that. So they take them out and exhibit them. You know, and they have some pretty priceless stuff they'll run around the track there. You know.
Which actually brings up another question about use. And that is the fact that racing cars of various ages, from the brass era through the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, into the current era, some are more usable than others by owner operators. What is it? Is it with the motorcycle? Sort of up to what age can someone who is not a racer ride for enjoyment a racing motorcycle as opposed to the current superbike and MotoGP variety?
Is that the age of the machine or the rider?
Yes, a collector, someone who's not a 21-year-old. Although MotoGP riders, I mean, look at Valentino Rossi. I mean, God bless him. You know, he keeps going like the Energizer Bunny. But you know, so is there a differential there that might be something that will pull people more towards the motorcycle side than the car side?
Well, I mean, I've seen in ARMA, the American Historical Racing Motorcycle Association, people racing on into their 70s and on motorcycles that are into their 70s too. But I am not sure about the licensure and so forth, what you have to do to stay current. I guess was never interested. I know some people race, but I don't know how they do that. And maybe you can answer this, Don. What do they do in vintage car racing? Is there some sort of licensure there, or?
Yes, you have to have licensure from the sanctioning body, and also most of them require medical certificates.
Okay.
Although medical certificates are as good as the doctor who's your best friend or next door neighbor, but that's.
The people down at my
It is similar. It is similar with motorcycles.
Yeah.
ARMA and USCRA both need licensing, and basically you have to pass a class and then go out on the track. And they often have a rookie race where all the beginners go out together, which is usually pretty interesting. And if they feel you're safe and under control, you wear a rookie vest for that first race, and then you pass, and then you can take it off after that. But it is licensed. Everything has to be licensed on the track for vintage road racing.
And I guess, again, thinking about usability and experiences, there are some sports racing cars that you can drive on the street, but they're not very interesting or satisfying to drive on the street because their performance envelope is so extreme that they really need to be exploited to a high level. I would imagine it's the same with racing motorcycles. And sort of where is that cutoff in terms of the age of racing motorcycles, that someone could still get enjoyment out of it on a nice, great country road?
Well,
can I jump on this one?
Yeah, Buzz.
My feeling is the older ones are easier to ride on the street than the new ones. Not idling. I mean, if you can't idle, then it's going to be a challenge carrying speed into a turn and out of a turn. really, really 50s, the 60s, even into the 70s, unless there was like a TZ 250 Yamaha factory GP bike. You can't ride that on the street. But pretty much any BMW, even the Reg Pridmore BMWs, you could ride those on the street, couldn't you, Summer?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know if you would.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend who actually rode a TZ 750 on the street, and it's not anything I would recommend. And he also took it out on the interstate and did over 150 on it. But
Yeah.
he's no longer with us, but that was for different reasons. But
Okay, good.
It's not practical.
They're not practical. You have other issues like suspension. It's like cars, they have a pretty rigid suspension, which is designed to start being activated when you're starting to pull G's and so forth from there. Same with a motorcycle, the suspension is designed to come alive at about 70 when you hit bumps. When you're riding around on the street at 30, it's like you're riding a rigid vehicle.
Yeah. The other thing which is interesting for me is also the consideration, again, in terms of use versus display. Obviously, metallurgy has come a very, very, very long way in the last 100 or so years. And at what point in the restoration of a motorcycle does it become akin to the restoration of a vintage boat or yacht or an airplane, where you have to replace so much of what was original on the motorcycle in order to make it functional?
Well,
now you're talking about antique, not classic.
Yes, talking about antique motorcycles.
And there are metallurgy issues. When I rode a 15 Harley across the United States, we checked the frame very carefully in the forks, which are the main components. The engines, those are easy to fix. But one of the riders was on a 19, maybe 13 Sears motorcycle. Forks collapsed on him on the Cannonball, and he got hurt pretty badly, went to the hospital. So metallurgy issues are a concern, not so much of design as much as age. I know, like some of the Vincent's, Summer, this is your world. Some of them, the forks, the front ends are rusting on the inside, I understand.
On the early ones, the later ones were alloy, so that wasn't an issue. The earlier ones with a girder fork, they would rust from the inside out, which is an issue with any girder fork. It's a tube, and the condensation gets on the inside and it starts rusting all the way out. In an interesting interview years ago with Phil Vincent, somebody asked him, said, well, how long do you expect your bikes to last? He said, well, the metallurgy is probably good for 30 years. And the guy was like, what? He said, no, it's metal starts regressing to the mean. It goes back to what it was. Think about that every time I ride.
It is a comment that a viewer just put in, and this is sort of an aside referencing the BMW. He said that 30 years ago he rode a bike in what was then Yugoslavia. He said it was quite amusing to him that the police cars were Yugos, but that the bikes were BMWs. So obviously, everyone wanted to go into the motorcycle service, and that's okay. Don't put me in a car. I'm good. But as we head towards the end of this, I know in my chat with you, Buzz, earlier today, some annoying questions which sometimes we get asked, and this is not an annoying question. I don't mean that because I don't want to insult the viewer. Thank you very much for sending it, but it's something that I think could help us give a view, considering the range of the vehicles that are in the show that's coming up here at the museum. And again, I invite you all to take a look at the website, audrainautomuseum.org, in future upcoming exhibitions. And there's a list of all the motorcycles and bicycles that will be in the show and descriptions of them, and sort of really get to look at those and ask us questions about those, or give us information about them, ways that you remember these motorcycles. Going through the show with Buzz was very funny. I think there are at least 8 or 10 motorcycles in the show that he either currently owns or had owned and had great memories of riding. And so a question was asked, and I think we'll do 3 for each of you. What you consider the 3 greatest motorcycles of all time? It's a better question than that. What is your favorite? Because this gives you a range. So let's start with you, Paul.
That's a tough one, because it's, you know, what I think are best are also probably my favorites. But I think one for me very clearly is the Ducati 750 Supersport. In terms of what it is mechanically, aesthetically, the rarity of it, you know, what it was meant to commemorate. I also have a real fascination with the 50s, 60s MVs, but the 3 and 4 cylinder, the 350s up to the 500s. In my eyes, that's one of the greatest racing bikes ever built. And I think the other one is on the opposite end of the spectrum, but in terms of just quality, is what's sitting behind you is a /2 BMW, and the boxer motor that BMW built and used for decades on into the GS line, and all of that is I think is as an approachable, just fantastic piece of very regular product. I think that's as good as it gets.
Summer?
Well, I have a soft spot, as many people tell you, for Vincent motorcycles. I've been messing with them, or they've been messing with me for 40 years, actually probably 45. And I mean, they're very interesting. Also, like early, what you call bevel Ducatis, same thing Paul was describing. I had a 750 SS, which I really liked, and there's just something about the rumble of that engine that, it's like a pacemaker. It really gets you going when you hear it. And I still have one, albeit with an electric starter, which, hey, it still sounds good. And I like early BMWs. I have actually probably more old BMWs now that I do Vincent's, going back to 1928. Just classical design. I have one with 135,000 miles on it, and you just go out there and kick it, and it's like it just says, well, where are we going today? And stuff like that. And then those are my 3 favorites. Also, like early Japanese motorcycles. I mean, as an aside, I think one of the most significant motorcycles ever made was the Honda 750. I think it's changed the whole spin of the orbit after Honda did that. To me, Honda was kind of the Apple of motorcycles. They were so innovative. And when they introduced that, and it put a lot of people out of business and so forth, but they did all of a sudden realize that people want something reliable. Who would have ever thought that,
You mean not everybody wanted to be covered in grease during each journey?
Nobody wanted to wind up the end of the first year being a motorcycle mechanic.
And Buzz, your 3 picks.
I'm going to take a slightly different twist than the other 2, and I'm going to limit it to the machines that you have in your well-curated show. I look
Okay.
at your list. You've got some great eclectic mix, both by era and by purpose and by origin. So I'm going to pick 3 that you have in the show, all 3 of which I either have owned or currently own. The first is a Yamaha RD400.
Mm-hmm.
It was a giant killer. This 400 would run away from most 750s of its time back in the mid to late 70s. It was also my first race. I went out and raced my first race and crashed my first race. At a time when most didn't. The second bike I'm going to pick is the Ducati 750 Sport. It's more affordable than the Super Sport the other two talked about. I'm talking about the first generation round case. I also raced one of those. I didn't own it, my friend did, but he let me endurance race with him in the late 70s. In 1979, when I quit racing, I said, if you ever sell it, would you sell it to me? 1979. 2.5 years ago, he called me and said, hey, remember the Ducati? I said, yeah, great bike. What'd you ever do with it? He said, I still have it. I said, why are you calling me? He said, you wanted first option. So I bought the bike that I used to race in 1979. And the third bike from your curated show that I would pick is the Indian 101 Scout. It's from the 1930s. It was 28, 29, 30, 31, done. Fabulous handle, stable, long wheelbase, short seat height. Unbelievable bike, monster ride, a true classic trial 101 Scout. That's it.
Well, thanks very much, Buzz, and that's a great way to end it. We have a few more questions which we didn't get a chance to answer, but we will answer those on our website or on our next issue of 222, our Audrain Auto Museum magazine, online magazine. And I'd like to once again thank Paul Hageman, Buzz Cantor, and Summer Hooker for joining us tonight, and invite you all to come here to the Audrain Automobile Museum in Newport, Rhode Island, to see our show, and which we will have a virtual introduction to on the 22nd of February. So once again, you'll be able to watch that here online as we walk through the show and show you all of the bicycles and bikes on display. And the show, of course, is Balance and Power, the World on Two Wheels, 1885 to 1995. And also keep an eye out for an announcement for our next virtual seminar, which will be on the wrapping of a race car. And we'll be talking to David Schnorr, who's one of the leading race car design experts and preparers, and who's done a great job in wrapping the Audrain collections, Porsche GT2 RS Club Sport. So you'll be hearing that story. So thank you very much again, gentlemen. Thank you all for watching, and keep coming. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.